song from the 1990s, things that make you go, hum. Okay, but now, hopefully, the defense had some type of argument to support their client's innocence. Why don't we listen to what they told the jury?
The prosecutor told you there was no bullet strike. He's had this case. He knows the evidence. And then he put a witness up, and what did he do? Oh, defect. Oh, it's defect. Because he knew it. He couldn't have a bullet strike in there. He was nervous about that bullet strike. Remember that? We showed you it. And I really want you to think, we don't have any burden. We don't have to help that guy. We can just sit there. And if Mr. Tomczyk doesn't do that, everybody thinks it's a little defect. Well, it was a bullet strike. Why would the prosecutor tell you that? See, because it's the state's perspective, isn't it? They want you to believe he didn't want Sharon to live. He wants you to believe he didn't want her to have medical attention. Now, there's some real concerns about this. Real concerns because the prosecutor presented statements, and what we hear in the 911 call is quite clear. You hear Thomas Randolph screaming and crying, screaming and crying. And there's a point, you know, some part of it sounds so, and if you envision it, and you think that your wife has been shot, and you roll her over, and you see that image, what would a person do but scream? Your wife is gone. She's in terrible shape. And he did what a normal human would do. He screamed. And when I hear the state of Nevada complain, he didn't do this right, he didn't do that right, he didn't do this right. Can you imagine what a reasonable person would feel in that condition? How horrible it would be. How difficult it would be. I don't know how to do this. They blame him for saying, should I go open the door? Do you know what he was saying? Maybe if I go open the door, they can come and help her. We want you to understand our side. And we don't have a burden of proof. We don't have to prove anything. We have to show doubt. We don't even have to show that. If you see doubt that's reasonable, you're required to find Mr. Randolph not guilty. He wanted her to have medical aid. He was the only one who did it. I want you to do something. Listen to the 911 call. There's that silence. After you hear the clearing of the house, there's a silence. And it goes on. And the reason the silence is important, because you could hear it the first time, like, why is he talking about the silence? Tommy is outside. And he's wondering, because I brought it out in the statement. Remember how in the beginning they were saying that he was complaining about law enforcement not showing up for 20 or 30 minutes? That's not what he was complaining about. He was complaining that 911, that medical, didn't go in. He could see they're not going in. They didn't go in to help her.
Well, Katherine, Lizardo, he's had a lot of practice with the death of all the other wives to learn how to scream and faint. Oh, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to comment on something. And like the judge, okay, the jurors always look at the judge. That judge was turned around away from him. I mean, she was covering her face. At one point, she went like this. I mean, what does that send? What is the message that sends to the jury when the defense is closing?
Well, it sends to the jury that even the judge is not convinced with what the defense is trying to convince the jury. The judge turning and with her hands as well, not just turning her face, but with covering her face with her hands, that just shows that she completely does not buy what the defense was saying during their closing arguments. And I can see that the defense was focusing on the state's lack of fulfilling their burden or proving their burden beyond reasonable doubt, that usually for me is a signal that there's not much that they can go on except to focus on that law. Of course, it's the law and they have to say it, but he kept saying it over and over again. And his response to the 911 call, I have to say, it's not plausible because the defendant had one job to do, according to the 911 call or operator, which is to turn her over to save her. He could not even do that immediately.
And Joe Richardson, we tend to forget, though, that there was another death here. That's Michael Miller, who obviously he kind of befriended. He may have paid to do, he may have paid not even to kill her. He may have paid to do something else. Who knows? But he killed him as a setup. So there's two victims here, maybe three victims if you want to say, maybe four, maybe five if you want to talk about the family members, maybe six. All the other wives he had. I think that one of the daughters said that if you let him out, he's going to marry again and kill somebody else. This was pretty important, wasn't it, to convict him?
Yeah, it was absolutely important to convict him. I mean, he just wasn't believable when it came down to it. And the problem that he had is that the problem that the defense attorneys had, is that his action and his words and his inaction at a key time spoke more. I mean, when you don't want your guy to get on the stand, you don't want him to get on the stand, not only because there's a privilege against self-incrimination, but because consistent with that, he's going to get on and he's going to get, I was going to say killed, but that wouldn't be a good term right now. He was going to get creamed in cross-examination, right? But why do you need him to get on to help himself and get creamed in cross-examination when he effectively does it himself by the things that he says, all of the interviews that he gave, all of the things that he said, and then he's talking to the 911 person, and here's what he says that he does versus what he actually does. And so I think that spoke louder than anything. And even while the defense was trying to say, prosecution, they said they'd do this, they said they'd deliver that, but they were inconsistent this way, inconsistent that way. None of that spoke louder than what the defendant himself said before he got to trial. And ultimately, that's what carried the day.
Quickest way to a jail cell is either to get on the stand or, in this case, to talk to the police over and over and over again. And media outlets, of course, we loved it, but obviously no one bought his story, including the jury. Anyhow, very serious case. I'm sure the victims feel relieved that indeed on the retrial he is going back to prison. But on the other side of this break, we're going to talk about another case we're covering. That is a case of Iowa versus Henry Dinkins, a very serious case, a convicted sex offender who is accused of murder. Stay with us.